What's up guys? Welcome back to another video. This is Travis here. Today we're going to be discussing the pros and cons of bare bottom versus sanded aquariums. Now I apologize, my voice is a little scratchier and deeper than usual. I've been under the weather for the last couple days, so I haven't been able to get content out. Now, with that being said, we're not only going to talk about the pros and cons, we're going to discuss my personal setup, the direction I went with, and why I chose to go that direction. And then finally, we're going to answer a question that I get pretty often is, how do I go from an established sanded reef tank to a bare bottom reef tank safely? So we're going to cover all that here in this video. So without further ado, let's get into it. Alright, so let's go ahead and do the pros and cons of a sanded aquarium first, just because this is the most common setup for new hobbyists. Now, if it sounds like I'm reading off a list, it's because I am, and let me explain why. Now, this question has been asked hundreds of times on several forums. Now, basically what I did is I went ahead and I Googled the question myself, and it came up with a list of forums. And I went ahead and I just read the responses page after page after page after page, put the most common answers together in this list, and then as we go through the list, I'll kind of give you my 2 cents. Alright, so let's go ahead and get into it. Okay, so let's look at the pros of a sanded aquarium. Number 1, the tank looks more natural. I agree with that. Number 2, you have good light reflection back up underneath the corals. I agree with that as well. Sand provides a ton of light reflection, making the tank look really bright. Number 3, you can have sand sifting animals that you can't have in a bare bottom tank. Now, I agree and I disagree with this. With some species, like sand sifting sea stars just won't do well in a bare bottom, but like the Melanor's wrasse, for example, that I have, instead of sleeping in the sand, he just sleeps in the zoanthid rock without any issues. What am I at? Number 4, we have beneficial bacteria, basically having more surface area for it. Now, I don't agree with that at all. I think there's other ways you can provide surface area for beneficial bacteria via marine pure block, sand in a refugium, or rubble rock in a refugium. You don't necessarily need to have the sand to do that. Number 5, I can't deny this at all. Cushion for falling rocks. Yes, having sand definitely saves the bottom of your tank to a certain extent. Now, a big enough rock falls, no matter what you do, you're going to be screwed. But it's good to have if you have like a big fish or an eel that likes to mess stuff up and kind of like knocking over little rocks. Hitting a sand bed is definitely better than directly to the glass for sure. Number 6 will be the last one on the pros here is deep sand bed provides a place for nitrifying bacteria to live. Just like inside rock, like deep inside the rock where the nitrifying bacteria will live in the low oxygen areas, having a deep sand bed provides that area so they can finish off the processing nitrates into nitrogen gas, which eventually bubbles out of the tank. So yes, I do agree with that, but you can get the same effect if you have a big enough deep sand bed in a refugium. You can still get that to a smaller extent. It's just a little bit different. So let's go and move on to the cons. Now, when it comes to the con side of things, there's really only 3 that kept seeing over and over again, and here they are. Number 1, mixing the sand up too much can release that nitrogen gas that I mentioned earlier that could kill fish and coral. Now, I agree and disagree. I mean, if you really have to go out of your way to release enough of that gas to hurt anything in that tank, just skimming the surface, I don't believe will do anything negative to the reef tank. Now, if you're in there sticking your fingers and wishing it around, and yeah, you can expect something bad to happen. But if you're just trying to clean the tank, I don't see it being an issue. And that moves on to the second one. It's harder to clean a sand bed without disturbing it too much. No, I don't think that. I mean, I don't think that's true. They put it as a con, but I think if you do it right, as with anything, you're going to be fine. What I used to do is take the siphoning hose and just keep it like maybe a thumb's length away from the bottom of the sand and just siphon off the detritus and leave it at that. Don't stick it in the sand and you'll be fine. And then number 3 here, you have to have limited flow to prevent sandstorms. I agree, but I mean, I've seen a lot of sanded tanks that are full SPS that are doing great with tons of flow. It just depends on what direction you have the flow going, how it's bouncing off the walls of the aquarium. You can't just blast it downward at the sand bed and expect everything to be okay. So that's the pros and cons of a sanded aquarium. Okay, so let's move on to the bare bottom pros and cons. Number 1 pro for bare bottom tank is unlimited amount of flow. Agree with that 100%. Number 2, they're easier to clean. I agree with that as well. You use a power head just to move all the detritus to one side of the tank and then just siphon it out. Done with that. Number 3, once the glass, bottom glass that is covered with coralline algae, you get great light reflection back up underneath the corals. I agree with that 100%. If not better than sand, it's definitely really bright once it's covered in coralline. Number 4, it's easy to grow carpeting corals so you can frag them out. Yeah, I agree with that. If you want to grow, a carpet of green star polyps, I've done that. And then you can, if you don't want it anymore, just use a razor blade, go underneath it, and then cut it up into pieces, and you're good to go. Also, growing mushrooms, zoanthids are always good to grow on the glass because you can razor blade them off, put them in some rubber rock, and once they attach to that rubber rock, you can add that to a frag plug. And then the final pro here is animals can't dig underneath the rock, causing the rock structure to be unstable. I agree and I disagree. I agree with the fact that they will make it unstable if you do not build your rock structure on the glass in the first place. And I've mentioned previously, always build your rock structure on the glass, then add the sand. That way you don't have to worry about those sand sifting critters moving stuff around and then making stuff unstable. So that is what it is. All right, moving on to the cons of a bare bottom aquarium. I really only have 3 here. Number 1, there's nothing to cushion falling rock. Yes, there's a big difference between falling on sand than straight to the glass, but at the end of the day, a big enough rock falls, it really doesn't matter what you have there. Now that's why I always say, and I always recommend to everyone, to epoxy your rock, no matter the size of it or where it's located. Attach it to another rock to make sure it doesn't fall. It's just safer that way. And then check to see how stable it is every once in a while. As I mentioned in a previous video, and I'll put the link to the video of the eel almost killing my reef tank because he just kept smashing his head against the rock when he ate, and eventually over a year it just wobbled it loose and broke off that epoxy, and I almost lost everything because of it. So it's always good to epoxy and then check that epoxy to make sure it's good to go. All right, moving on. Number 2, less surface area for beneficial bacteria. I already mentioned I don't agree with that and said why. Number 3, you can't have as many sand sifting animals. Yeah, you can't have as many, but you can still have some of them. So I don't agree with that. Or better yet, I agree and I disagree. I'll leave that up for debate. So let's go ahead and move on. Well, as you guys can see, I have a bare bottom reef tank. Now, it hasn't always been that way. I made the switch a few years ago just because the direction I was going in this hobby ended up changing. Now, what I mean by that is I wanted to go full SPS, or at least 99% SPS, and I wanted to have a ton of flow. I wanted a tank that was easy to clean, and I really liked the look of that purple on the bottom of the glass. Now, what I did is I ended up making the switch while the tank was already established, and in this next part of the video, we're going to get into some of the things you can do to do that without killing anything in your reef tank. So let's go ahead and get into it. So how do you go from sand to a bare bottom aquarium without causing any problems with the reef tank? I will say first off, guys, that this is a long process, so if you don't have patience, don't even bother. With that being said, I recommend you guys remove your sand during your weekly or bi-weekly water changes. Now, if I had to do it again, since I do my bi-weekly water change of 20%, I might increase it to 30%. And then what I do is I still use 5-gallon buckets from Home Depot when I do my water change. It's just something I do. Now, basically what I would do, guys, is just use the hose to siphon off a thin layer of sand during your water change, and then, have that go into the bucket, dump it out in the backyard or wherever. Obviously, don't put it in your toilet, but, do that over your water changes over several months. I would say, when I initially did it, I did it over a 2-month period of weekly water changes to finally get all the sand out, and I recommend you guys take either that long or even longer, depending on how old your reef tank is. If your reef tank is 10 years old and you're trying to remove the sand bed in there, I would do it over like a 3 or 4 month period, just because it could get really nasty with some of the stuff that's really deep underneath the sand bed. A couple things you should be aware of when doing this is rock structure stability. If you built your rock structure on top of a sand bed, be ready for it to be unstable when you start siphoning the sand from underneath it. So I would recommend, if you did do that, go ahead and do sections of rock at a time. Like if your rock structure is built like mine, you can go ahead and say do the left section, get all the sand out of there, then rebuild that structure if possible with epoxy to make sure that it's strong and stable. Now, another thing you guys want to keep an eye on is your fish and how they're breathing. If they're up at the surface of the water, like trying to gas for air, that's a bad thing. That means you release too much of that nitrifying gas into the tank. I would perform an additional water change if possible, so keep extra water on hand if you can, and if not, at least try to get some power heads agitating the surface area to try to get some oxygen back into that tank. So just keep an eye on those 2 things. They're very important. That's why I recommend you go slow through this, because slow and steady wins the race. If you rush this process, the chances of you winning the race are, depending on how old your tank is, probably not going to be very good. Well, guys, that's about it for this video. I appreciate you sticking around. If you have any questions, put it in the comment section below or contact me directly via Facebook or email. As always, if you liked the video, give me a thumbs up. Don't forget to subscribe for more, and I'll see you next time. Peace.